And I can't believe you're going to make me do this because I wanted to jump right into Ferrari because I was so unbelievably impressed by both drivers. But because you mentioned it and we're already talking about Mercedes and maybe a little sour grapes, I bring you Lewis Hamilton's comments ahead of the Grand Prix. He said, when I qualified half a second, 6/10 ahead of Valtteri Bottas, the media didn't say the same thing as they say today when Max qualified 6/10 ahead of Checo. It's blown up much more. In my personal opinion, Valtteri and all of my teammates have been stronger than the teammates Max has had. Okay, real quick. Let's just break it down before you debate it, boys. Lewis's teammates, Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso, Nico Rosberg, Valtteri Bottas, George Russell. Max's teammates, Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, and now Sergio Perez. Fair statement to make, Laurence? Out of bounds.
I think the reasons for him saying it are a little out of bounds, but I do kind of agree with what he's saying, because if you look at his teammates, well, 3 of them are world champions. None of Max's are world champions. And George Russell, I think, genuinely has the potential to go on and win a championship. Looking at the others, maybe Albon, if things go right in his career, but the others, I'm not sure they're of that caliber. So I do think there is something in what Lewis is saying. I think it's a little bit ungracious to bring it up now, when all the focus is on Max. But, I can kind of see where he's getting to. With the Toto ones, I just want to go back to that because I don't agree with what Toto said. I think the fact that Max has won 10 races in a row is impressive, because it's never been done before. And there's a reason it's never been done before, because it is incredibly hard to do. But there are factors that contribute towards that. And also, if you look at the drivers that have previously held the record, they're not necessarily drivers that you hold up as the very, very best that have ever raced in F1. So Sebastian Vettel previously had it, but he won those 9 races. And then the next year in 2014, didn't win a race at all. So there's some very key ingredients that go into winning X amount of races in a row. And it's basically having a very dominant car. So I think when we talk about how great an achievement this is by Verstappen, we should actually talk about how great an achievement it is by Verstappen and Red Bull, because Red Bull have built this dominant car that's allowed him to go and win races basically uncontested, and also a reliable car. You need a car that, 10 races in a row finishes. That sounds maybe simple in the modern era of F1, but it's really not. And also in the past, it's been increasingly difficult it's been very difficult to do in the past. So the other thing you need is a teammate who's not very competitive, a teammate who's going through a bit of a poor patch. So when Vettel did his 9, it was the end of Webber's career at Red Bull. And it really was a shadow of the driver that we'd known previously as Mark Webber, challenging for the championship in 2010. He really had, lost out. And then again, next year, Vettel went up against Ricciardo, and Ricciardo actually beat him quite easily. And then you look at someone like Ayrton Senna. I consider Ayrton Senna among the very best drivers in the world. The most consecutive races he ever won was 4. And he did that in 1988. I think he did it other times as well. And in 1988, he had a dominant car, as dominant almost, or possibly as dominant as this current Red Bull. But the difference being is that he had Alan Prost as a teammate who was pushing him to the championship. So while I don't agree that this, Toto said this was an irrelevant record, I absolutely do not agree with that. But it is an unusual record in that there's usually key ingredients that go into it. The fact that Lewis is on 5, Nico Rosberg is on 7 consecutive wins as his record. And that's because at the end of the 2015 season, Lewis won the title, didn't really bother showing up to the final 3 races, and then had a bunch of reliability issues at the start of 2016. So Rosberg, well done for getting 7 in a row, but there's always, circumstances involved with winning in this fashion, I think. So yeah, just things to try and see it from the other side. Again, I'm not saying I agree with Toto. I don't think it was, particularly, sporting or the right thing to say at that moment. But there is an argument that perhaps this record is an unusual one in that it requires some various things to be in place. And one of those, undoubtedly at the moment, is Perez not fighting Verstappen for whatever reason. I don't know if we're going to ever find out that reason, but certainly there's something going on there which isn't working for Perez.
Okay.
The other part of that statement from Lewis that I thought was strange, because I'm the same with Laurence. I actually tend to agree with him on his teammates, just because you look at the pedigree of them. But the bit that was weird, I thought, was when he said, when I was out qualifying Bottas, the media didn't talk about it in the same way. Because that's one thing we did do repeatedly. You know, we constantly were, you know, the joke was, oh, it's Bottas 2.0 this year, it's Bottas 3.0, it's Bottas 4.0, and he'd win an early race and everyone would get excited, and then he'd just disappear and drop off. You know, and Laurence and I have talked about this before. If you really want to get into the weeds of it, you know, Bottas by the end of 21, especially, his form had really just dropped off. And you could argue Lewis, obviously there's the whole Michael Massey situation, but if Bottas is in a better position at the end of that, you know, that race, Max can't make that free pit stop that basically changed everything. So in that sense, he's right. You know, we weren't super critical of Bottas after Abu Dhabi, which was because we were all talking about Michael Massey. But I feel like for the majority of that time, the narrative was Lewis is great, Bottas is just good. You know, he's not. And that's kind of where we're at with Perez. The difference being, I don't think Bottas was ever in a car where it was this one-sided in terms of it's just Mercedes winning. You know, there was always Ferrari were in the mix or Red Bull were in the mix. But I think it shows a bit of a short memory from Lewis, because it wasn't like he and Bottas were fighting wheel to wheel. I don't really remember any race where Bottas beat Lewis, you know, by passing him on track. That, you know, he had some very strong races. I'm just looking on Wikipedia now. He's got 10 race wins. So
wait, you're looking at Wikipedia?
Yeah, a little known website called Wikipedia. I'm actually looking. I've actually got F1 records up there as well. It's pretty good. It's worth a read at some point. But yeah, and you know, you just look quickly through the wins there. It's a bit like the wins that Checo's getting. There's wins here and there. We're like, oh, he was great that weekend, but he was never in the fight in the same way. So I think Lewis has got a bit of a short memory there, because, you know, he always talks about Bottas as if he was, you know, it's his favorite teammate ever. But from a competitive standpoint, I think Bottas is probably one of his weakest. And if he looks at Button, Alonso, etc., and you know, especially those two guys, you know, they were so strong. And obviously Rosberg, who won a championship against him, those guys were way stronger than Bottas. And I think it was just a weird comparison for him to use, because it was exactly the same as what's happening now. I think it's just a bit more acute because Max is winning so much and Perez has been so bad. But that was the bit from the Lewis quotes I thought really stood out to me.
Also, while we're on it, shout out for Heikki Kovalainen, who we missed on our list.
Yes.
He's forgotten Lewis Hamilton teammate, but of course was the teammate that was going up against Lewis when he won his first title. So not insignificant. And, you know, as much as I like Kovalainen as a driver, I'm not sure he would match up that well against a lot of Max's teammates. With the Valtteri one and Perez, though, it is a really interesting comparison, but I think Valtteri was, you know, he wasn't. There were occasions where he got obliterated by Lewis, but not in the same way that Perez has by 1.2 seconds or whatever it was in Zandvoort. You know, like Perez is really off the boil at the moment. He wasn't at the start of the year, so he didn't start the year like this. But at the moment, something is, it's not working out for him. And I think it's a real shame, because the potential of Perez, I think, is up there with Bottas, but the reality is less so. Bottas had a bad season in, I think it was 2018, where he actually considered quitting the sport at the end of it. But then came back pretty strong in 2019. So also, you know, let's see what Perez brings next year. If he can get his head straight as well, he might do something similar to what Bottas did, where have an awful season and then come back a bit stronger, perhaps not good enough to beat Max, but a bit stronger at least. And then we can reassess it then. But yeah, it's an interesting debate. But I would say Lewis has had the stronger teammates, but I don't think bringing that up now, you know, it kind of really makes any sense.
Yeah, it looks terrible, doesn't it?
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.